Well, one of the things like a couple therapists will do for you is try to understand what we call your negative cycle. Because PIC stands for positive interactional cycle, negative interactional cycle. And the only reason it wasn't the other way around is because Nick Pick sounds like a negative name, right? So, but the idea is like if I was a fly on the wall and I'm watching how you guys don't get along, what does it look like? It doesn't matter where you start because this person does that or says that, the other person reacts this way, and it just kind of go ping pong back and forth. So anywhere you start, it's going to continue around the same path usually because it's a circle. So this understanding of the negative cycle is like where we step on each other's toes, you know? Um, if I come in with a certain, and there's a whole lesson on this, but like on tone, let's say, volume, if I'm displaying a certain kind of nonverbal, a certain kind of musculature in my face, all these are signals that get sent, and the other person is either consciously or often subconsciously interpreting that as threat, right? And then their defensive posture is going to show a type of non-receptivity. It's going to show a kind of maybe a threat back, or oftentimes the case is they kind of almost disappear, you know?
Mhm.
A lot of couples complain about that. Like I bring something up and they just leave, or they sit there, but I could see on their face they're not even there, right? And so we kind of see this dance. It's either escalating kind of conflict, or at some point one person just kind of leaves the conversation and the other person just goes more frustrated because nothing they're throwing is landing, right?
Mhm.
And the other person might feel the same, like there's no point to throw anything at this person because they won't listen. So there's just
Mhm.
different responses to the same problem.
Mhm.
I got to throw harder and more, or I just got to stop trying. And of course, one's going to frustrate the other. So the person being pursued is going to be upset. They can't seem to get away. The person won't let up. They got no peace about this. It's not being resolved. The other person's upset because they want engagement, but the other person's disengaging. So the negative cycle will look often something like that. And
Mhm.
there'll be keywords, there'll be certain, maybe personal attacks. There'll be, other things that are worse. I mean, some couples can even escalate into violence at times, throwing objects or what have you. And these are just signs of how big the cycle can get, right? How much it could grow. But a lot of couples too we deal with is there isn't much there because they're both passive, you know? They bring something up, it's a bit of a friction, and then they both kind of like, well, we don't want to talk about this. So they just sweep it under the rug. And, eventually, you're going to trip over a rug with that many lumps, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah. I think it bears mentioning that as therapists, we're in a privileged position to be able to see these patterns, and that's sometimes what makes us useful, right? And the challenge is to be able to recognize and work with these patterns when you're activated, when you're in the thick of it, And the truth be told, my wife and I get into conflicts, and she might say something, and you're a therapist, right?
mhm.
And so, I have to backpedal a little bit and recognize that I too can get drawn in and be activated. And when you're activated, your frontal cortex isn't sorting things out logically, right? And so the
Of course.
part of the challenge is being able to step out, and I think part of it, Michael, is having some curiosity, saying, "Hey,
Mm,
what's going on here?" Because it seems to be coming up a lot. And where does that come from? Is what's my role in it? What's
mm,
what's what's the role of my wife, my family, or whatever the
mhm,
conflict is?
mhm.
And then just to start to move into it. But it needs to be recognized that it's really hard to think through systemically when you're in the thick of it, right? Everybody is challenged by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think well, we use that in the course is after someone shares something, you do some reflective listening, and there's certain tips on how to do proper reflective listening. And then there's sort of what we call the pro tip, which is to ask a curiosity question, an open-ended one. That's the difference. So we don't want to go, I'm curious, why the heck did you do that? That's not a curiosity question. It's more like you shared such and such, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Could you share something more? Now,
Mhm.
this is a key component because, first of all, if you first validate, like I heard what you said, I mean, keep in mind, you're not necessarily agreeing with them. You're just letting them know it was hurt, right? You threw it, I caught it. I got it, all right? So once you do that, they kind of feel a little less tense, a little less combative or whatever. But then
Mhm.
when you say, "Hey, could I have some more, please?" That just, let's admit it, that's not a normal thing usually in a couples fight, right? Or
Mhm.
argument. But what it does is it invites them in. Come,
Mhm.
give me more. I'm still
Mhm.
receiving. I'm not, because most
Mhm.
of the problems that couples have is they don't listen. They are already thinking of their response before you even finished your point.
Mhm.
And as soon as you stop talking, they throw back what their point is. And the picnic model kiboshes that
Mhm.
because you can't do it that way. So if you're like in the listener role, it's not your time to make your point. So you do want more information. And that invitation, tell me more, I want to understand that more, makes
Mhm.
the person feel invited. It makes them feel
Mhm.
more open, more vulnerable. And you can get yourself down from the leaf to the root if you have a kind of receptivity.
Mhm.
So that's the idea behind that as far as
Yes, a
you.
receptivity, a curiosity,
Hmm.
and a willingness to, brave the storm,
Hmm.
and be able to start recognizing those patterns, like the one that some of the ones that you mentioned, like the withdrawing, the two that withdraw over
Hmm.
and want to put it under the rug. So
Hmm.
that there's that withdrawer
Hmm.
situation, and then there's the with the pursuer and the withdrawer saying,
Hmm.
the pursuer wants attention or wants answers,
Hmm.
and they're triggered, they're activated,
Hmm.
and then the withdrawer is likewise activated as well. And I think part of the fuel that's going on, that's driving these cycles,
Yeah,
is, again, it's fear, or sometimes
sure.
sometimes we call it trauma.
Well, but I'm going to speak briefly about primary and secondary emotions because what happens is most of the time in our coupleships, our primary emotion that wounds us the most is sadness. Okay. I'm sad because why? Sadness is an emotion that reacts to a loss, to an absence. Okay. So something's not in the relationship that I need, or something I thought I had is gone. It's not there right now. So it's really sadness, but sadness is so painful and vulnerable that we have what's called a secondary emotion come over it. Okay. It can be anger, right? Because anger is like that big guard at the door, and I can kind of make myself big and feel protected. What's it protecting? Sadness, right? But anger comes out instead. Instead of saying I'm sad, it's why'd you do that? So that, and the other, like you said before, fear, like a withdrawer might be really displeased at the situation, and they have needs and wants too, but they're basically calculating cost. If I try to go and get into this vulnerable place and share this thing that I really want, but I get rejected, okay, put down, that would be worse than the current pain of just having an upset partner. So I'll put up with the situation, right? I'll withdraw or whatever. I basically put up with things to not solve it, to not fix things,
Mm-hmm.
because even though it's painful and I don't like it, it's less of a cost than if I do get vulnerable and it gets shot down. So the withdrawer is really in fear and protecting not so much from the partner, but from their deep wound being confirmed by the partner. They don't want to take the chance it might get confirmed. So that's why they withdraw. Whereas the person who's more pursuing um, is maybe being more forward, more angry or something. They're
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily thinking in terms of fear, but rather, you meet my sadness. But it's kind of like saying, asking someone out on a date, going like, mean and rough and saying, "Why the hell don't you want to go on a date with me?" And like, you're not exactly the approach I would want to go on a date with,
Yeah, that's
because
not dating.
you
That's
you're,
not
you're
the kind of.
you want to sell me something, and you're telling me, it looks rough and tough and
Mhm,
threatening, and I'm supposed to just want to take it home with me. It just it
mhm,
we and that's why we get frustrated, because we're really using the wrong approach. We're putting across a message in such a way that it's only going to get activated defenses. And then we get frustrated we're not getting what we want. So we have to pull back from that. We have to recognize what's underneath it and
mhm,
find this new way of communicating so we can
mhm,
actually get what we want and
mhm,
give the other person what they need. And
mhm,
I think that that's the other side of it. This isn't just, hey,
mhm.
individuals in a coupleship, here's how to get only what you want. That's not couple. Okay. It's also, how do I really know how to provide what the other person needs? I
Yeah.
have to be willing to want to give it to them as well as receive from them.
Yeah, and again, I think it needs to be emphasized that it takes curiosity and a sense of safety and a willingness to work at it to
Mhm.
recognize these patterns. And it's not easy. Sometimes therapy for a couple can be a wonderful way, a platform to explore these things in a safe, respectful environment,
Mhm.
and also sort of develop the language around it.
Right.
How to articulate these primary and secondary emotions in a way that brings you closer to your partner and deepens your
Mhm.
relationship. So that's the I think we've covered the negative cycle pretty well, Michael.
Yep.
There's the positive cycle. So the picnic
Mhm.
is the positive cycle, and the negative cycle we've covered.
Mhm.
So what about the positive cycle? Let's talk about that a little
Right.
bit.
Well, I mean, in the course, it has many more steps, and there's short lessons on each point, so that the couple can absorb it and try to put it into practice. And, the positive cycle, as mentioned earlier, is like we have to be able to know the safety of the conversation. So there are distinct roles. So whenever you're in a conversation, it should never be unclear who's in what role. So you start off and you say, okay, in this case, Mr. goes first, and he has to share something not about the other person, but from an incident. This is what it feels like for me, right? So it's a me statement instead of a you, right? So they get to share a certain ways. There's certain skills we have in the course about that. And the other person at the moment is only a listener. So they don't get to respond to what, yeah, in the other person's saying. They're taking it in, they're reflecting it back. They're listening with one ear to their own heart, like they're having reactions, obviously, right? But they're basically saying, when it's my turn, I'm going to say this or that, but they don't say it right now. They reflect back instead what the person was saying. And then I mentioned earlier the curiosity or open-ended question, and then they receive again. Okay. And that might be two, three volleys, and then they would switch hats. Okay. And now the reflective listener becomes the speaker, and the speaker becomes a reflective listener. And they'll say, okay, well, here's what was going on for me, and this is what looked like, and this is what it felt like, and this is what's going on in my heart. And the other person does the same thing back to them, reflects, asks curiosity questions, and so on. And that's stage one. When you just get that started, it already is a different kind of conversation. The safety, we're following some rules here. This is the boundaries, if you will, the guardrails, makes it more safe to do the conversation. Now, I'll say at the beginning, you try it on your own, but that's where the couples therapist kind of helps out, because sometimes couples have trouble with the guardrails. So being in sessions, kind of like having a referee, to say, well, out of bounds. Let's keep it in bounds, and until you get the skill built up, right?
Mhm.
But that is the initial start to the positive interactional cycle. It develops from there, as you'll see in the course. There's different stages. There's different ways we can reflect back. We can identify nonverbals, tonality, different things. Say, hey, you say this, but your face looked like this, and I don't know how to take that. You know, So there's different ways you can have fuller conversations. And of course, getting down to your own roots. Like you have to know what are your roots. Like the most dangerous thing is to not know what makes you
Yeah.
tick.
Yeah, and it's important, of course, to know what your feelings are.
Exactly.
And I think that it's isn't it amazing that we don't have those kind of conversations more naturally? Isn't it amazing that we're taught, early on to get our needs met by telling other people what they need to do, which is really disempowering if you think about it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so, a process like this, a concerted, sort of purposeful, structured way of saying, this is how I'm feeling. Start with
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Because if you're able to say how you're feeling, then underlying that is what you need, right? If you can express how you
Yeah.
feel, then you're naturally saying what you need,
Hmm.
and your partner, the people around you who love you are going to naturally want to provide that to you.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think it's a wonderful exercise you're describing.
Yeah, I think couples are often fighting. They're talking about the what, okay, what they said, what they didn't say or do, whatever. They might talk about the how, which can feel like giving instructions, but they don't necessarily talk about the real why, okay? And the why is that because this is linked to a belief I have that if this isn't the kind of behavior I'm getting from my partner, it confirms I'm not enough this or too much of that. And that's the real why. And when we get the why in there, the other person, it makes sense. I had a quote the other day someone shared with me. It was from Mother Teresa, and it said something like, "Don't wash the dish because you're told to. Wash the dish for love of the next person who will use it." And it changes the concept of like stuff we're being asked for isn't about the thing on the surface. It's the meaning of the message of relationship to the others that I'm
Mhm.
in relationship with. And I think it kind of applies here, in that sense. Like our partner may ask us for a list of things to do. Really, they're just identifying what's called corresponding needs. If the need to have it done that way or for them or whatever, it corresponds to what? The wound. Okay. So indirectly, they're revealing their wound, right? I need you to talk to me a certain way and tell me this kind of stuff and be this way with me. That's the need. But what does it reveal about the wound? Well, that I don't have those things, and those things are needed to fill me up because I don't believe enough about myself, right? And you are supposed to provide that for me. So that's a really key element if you're going trying to develop the picnic is the positive side is you really want to get to what those needs are, but more importantly, the why of those needs.
Michael, I really appreciate I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate these ideas that you shared today. And I'm looking forward to the next episode of our podcast.
Great. I am too. Thanks very much.